Okay, so welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday. I'm Jay Warmke with solarpvtraining.com. And in case you're new to this format, basically what we're doing here is kind of broken down into three sections. I'll do a recap of the latest news within the solar industry. Then we'll do a rehash of events, webinars, conferences that are coming up over the next few weeks or so. And then we go into a deep dive on a topic that I hope is of interest to you and it's of interest to me and deals in the solar world. This week, we're going to be talking about, are we heading towards a major energy crisis in the next few years? And I'm really hoping this will be a discussion amongst the folks who are live online here. As part of this format, we have a number of people who join in during the week, or during the week, live as we're recording this. And then actually from all over the world. Somebody just said that they're here from Budapest, I think I'm supposed to say Budapest, if I remember right. So anyway, let me go ahead and jump in directly on the news of the week. This is for the week of, let's see, what is this week of May 18th? All right, just to get this thing date stamped for you. Solar and wind accounted for almost 98% of new electrical generating capacity added to the US grid in the first quarter of 2025 and was the only source of energy for the month of March. And let me see, I gotta mute a couple there. All right. According to recent data from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, March 2025 was the 19th consecutive month where solar was the largest source of new power added to the grid, dating all the way back to September of 2023. For the first quarter of this year, solar accounted for 72.3% of new capacity additions. Generation from wind turbines provided almost 25% of the nation's new electricity. Generation from wind now accounts for 11.8% of the nation's electricity, followed by solar at 10.7%. The inclusion of hydropower, which is 7.7, biomass 1.1%, geothermal 0.3%. And then when you add in rooftop solar, renewable energy now provides about 1/3 of the US's total energy generation or electrical generation. To put this into perspective, 10 years ago, renewables only accounted for 16.9% of power on the US grid, with wind at 5.7% and solar at 1%. So, really, over the last decade, wind's share of US generating capacity has more than doubled, while solar's has increased tenfold. The House Ways and Means Committee's draft reconciliation package plans to step down the investment and production tax credits for wind, solar, batteries, geothermal, and any other clean energy technologies after 2028, which is 4 years earlier than was originally set out in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The proposal also tightens eligibility by requiring projects be placed in service before they're eligible for these credits, as opposed to just beginning construction. And this is significant because, especially on these large systems, it can sometimes take years between the time construction begins and the time that is placed in service. So, largely due to interconnection times. And also because there's significant delays in procurement of electrical materials and construction materials, the switches, things of that nature. Also, most residential and construction tax credits for energy efficient appliances, solar panels, electrical vehicles, and EV chargers would also be eliminated under this proposal. And credits for electric and other clean fuel vehicles will also end after 2025 if this proposal is accepted. A study released last Thursday by the Clean Energy Buyers Association has determined that repealing these tax credits will actually raise the cost of energy for consumers and industry significantly across the 19 states that they studied. The study, which NERA Economic Consulting conducted for SEBA, modeled the state level electricity market outlets, assuming incremental demand increases from the growth of data centers primarily, under the two different scenarios, one with the tax credits in place and the other one without the tax credits in place. They found that from 2026 through 2032, the cost of electricity would increase significantly, largely due to the fact you would have to transition and rely a lot on natural gas, and natural gas pricing is constrained and also not very stable in its pricing model. The study also found that energy intensive industries such as iron and steel, chemicals, cement, and aluminum would be hardest hit by this. 7 of the 10 states studied would see double-digit increases in the average household and business electric prices, according to that study. And Maine would be the highest hit, with projections of around 20% increase in electricity costs for households and 19.3% for businesses. And then this is a fun one. U.S. energy officials have found unexplained communication equipment inside some Chinese-made inverter devices, according to a report from Reuters news agency. Reuters reported the presence of undocumented or rogue communication devices within these inverters, where someone could remotely bypass cybersecurity firewalls that utility companies put in place to prevent hacking. Similar devices were also found in Chinese-made battery systems. Inverters are highly digitalized products, often referred to as the heart or the brain of the solar system. And in theory, the hackers could remotely disrupt or shut off the power supply, resulting in power losses, blackouts, and perhaps even damaging the energy infrastructure. And that is the cheery news from the solar industry for this week. So anybody have anything they want to add to that? At the moment, anyone who's online, I'll give you that opportunity.
I would, I'd like to know more about that, about the devices in the inverters and batteries. I'd like to find out if does anybody know a URL that has a better discussion of all of this. I I have a friend who has worked at NREL, and he's been studying, and he commented about the possibility of hacking into microinverters, and I'd like to find out more information.
Yeah, I did try and look for that because this was just a brand new recent announcement. And they were very vague about the actual information, the numbers. They basically said they didn't want to identify the products and they didn't want to identify how many at the moment. But I'm sure this is one of those that people are going to latch onto. So if anybody has more details, yeah, great, share it there. One thing that I didn't mention is that Wood McKinsey did note as part of those articles that currently just 2 Chinese manufacturers essentially have 50% of the utility scale inverter marketplace. So this is very, very widespread. And perhaps another reason for having domestic manufacturing capacity so that when you are spied on, at least it's your own government and not somebody else's, right? So that always fills me with comfort. So, all right, so let's go ahead and look at some of the upcoming events here for the next couple of weeks. If you're not already there at Clean Power Conference, you're probably missing at least the first day. So that's happening this week in Phoenix, Arizona. Then there's a webinar, Data Center Energy Procurement, May 21st, 10 a.m. And I will mention again, I do this every week, but basically all of these times that I'm announcing are Eastern time here in the US. And I'm not giving you links because you can look things up, but hopefully you'll see on the graphic who is providing this webinar. Solar United Neighbors is going to be having a solar chat. They're trying to do these coffee chat sort of things. May 21st at 12:30 p.m. Then Fortress Power, this is from Renvu. And Renvu is a distributor. They do a lot of these kind of webinars where very product specific. I've attended a number of them. I find them helpful. Obviously it's a sales guy trying to sell their product, but if you're interested in that product, usually a lot of good information. Then there's one on cybersecurity. I'll bet you more people show up for that one now that we've had that announcement from Reuters. May 21st, cybersecurity in energy storage at 1 p.m. And then Solar United Neighbors is having one on battery resiliency, May 21st at 2 p.m. Avoiding costly mistakes, basically field inspections, PV module failures. This is May 29th at noon. And then June 3rd, residential solar sales, also at noon from Solar Power World. Webinar coming up June 5th on 600 volt versus 800 volt inverters. That's going to be at 2 p.m. And then June 12th, early design decisions. That's from Solar Power World. That's at 2 p.m. There's a conference June 9th through the 11th in Chicago, the Midwest Solar Expo. So you put that on your calendar. And since this, of course, is sponsored here in part by ASUS, I should probably mention ASUS is having a conference. That's the American Solar Energy Society, August 4th through the 6th in Boulder, Colorado. And then our shameless plug for our ongoing face-to-face classes, as well as the remote online courses at solarpvtraining.com. And that's all the announcements I had. Anybody else have any announcements they'd like to share with us at the moment? Give you just a second there. All right, so let's jump into the discussion. And I'm hoping this will be a discussion rather than me pontificating and pretending I have insight and wisdom into all of this stuff. A lot of what we're talking about here is pure and simple speculation. But what led me to think about this particular topic of essentially, are we heading into this energy crisis, is because at least in my world and looking at all of these things around energy, I get a lot of information from a lot of different sources, and each one of them is going to have significant impact on how our future progresses. But when you take them all in combination, then I just wonder, are we headed into unprecedented times? And that's something that I just wanted to explore, because I think typically, especially government, when we get these projections from government, they always make the assumption that everything is going to proceed similarly to how it proceeded in the past. And then they make slightly incremental adjustments. But we also know that when things change, they tend to change very abruptly. And they don't always just do what they did in the past. We have disruptions. We have periods of significant disruption. And it just feels to me, if you blur your eyes and you kind of look at it sideways, it feels like we're heading into something that might be pretty dramatic and fairly soon. So that's the perspective I'm coming at. And it may be completely wrong, but I just thought we would explore this. Once again, these sessions are accepted by ETA, the Electronic Technicians Association, as meeting a half hour or 30 minutes of continuing educational requirements for their solar certification. And that said, those of us who are old enough, who can remember the oil crisis of the 1970s. The oil crisis of the 1970s really defined that whole decade from an economic standpoint. And it's curious to point out that all of this disruption, much of it was all constrained on supply. We had a certain level of demand. That demand was not increasing very dramatically. But when the Arab oil embargo took place in the early 1970s, it constricted the supply of oil and caused the marketplace to be severely disrupted, came out of the blue. That whole disruption was a 7% disconnect between supply and demand. Basically, there was 7% more demand than supply. Just shows it didn't require huge differences, just a 7%. So if you look at the impact of that 7% disruption, we saw that essentially the prices quadrupled. The prices of gas, the impact of all of that quadrupled, and I would say likely led to the rise of Ronald Reagan, the ascendancy of Ronald Reagan through that, the decline of Jimmy Carter. There were obviously other things, but it was primarily the economy when you see this disruption. But we saw that the price of gasoline just shot through the roof, and there were long lines at gas stations and things of that nature. So it was a dramatic impact that lasted for more than a decade. It really defined, it created high inflation, it created fuel shortages, it created a movement towards energy efficiency, things of that nature. So it was significant. So at the moment, we're in another energy transition. We're in this transition of saying we want to electrify everything. And for many of us in this industry, we've considered that to be a good thing. You say, okay, we can transition to renewable energies. You can clean up the environment if you get rid of the burning of coal, get rid of the burning of natural gas, you get rid of the burning of fossil fuels, oil, diesel, transition the transportation industry towards electric and make that electric clean. It's all good. It's all positive. We're also seeing a transition of heating away from natural gas to electric. We're also seeing the advent of data centers, artificial intelligence, adding to that electric demand. So are we heading towards not a disruption of supply, but a disruption in demand, where suddenly we see such a dramatic increase in demand of electricity that we simply cannot meet that increase of demand and find ourselves in another 6, 7, 8, 10% imbalance, right? If a 7% imbalance in supply and demand of oil caused the price to quadruple, it will likely be something very similar if there's a 7 to 8% imbalance in the demand and supply of electricity. It would not be inconceivable to see the price of electricity quadruple under those circumstances. Okay, so there's the premise. Anybody have a comment before I get into some of the details?
Yeah, I think that it's very possible on what you said about demand. You have more of these power chargers and charging stations, and everybody wanted to connect to the grid and stuff like that. So I could definitely see the cost of power going up in the next few. I think it's already gone up on people's electric bills this year. Some electric companies have added higher, rates and stuff like that. That makes it $10 more on your electric bill a month. So I definitely see that.
Yeah, I think just from my own experience doing solar assessments, I've seen in the last 18 months or so, the average price for electricity here in Ohio, in the state of Ohio where I'm located, go from an average of around 12 cents a kilowatt hour to an average of around 18 cents a kilowatt hour. So that right there's a 50% increase in the last 18 months. And that's without these disruptions that we're talking about yet. So yeah, and when you look at comparative pricing, where states like California are already looking at 35 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity, clearly it's not inconceivable that could be the average over
I'm
time.
thinking I'm thinking there's a couple. I would say the efficiencies have offset most of the domestic consumption increases in electrification. This is just me. I don't have numbers. So, but I think what we're seeing just skyrocket is data centers and AI. You didn't mention AI, but just AI is just such an energy hog. And so is any of these cryptocurrency things. I think those are really kind of a wag out there. I mean, they just seem to suck up a bunch of money and a bunch of energy, and I don't know. They
Yeah.
seem to be catching on. So I think those are pretty unwieldy to predict as well.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track, and many what you're expressing is sort of what was sort of gelling in my mind. If you look historically at electrical demand, and that's what this diagram here is looking at, um, is we've seen from the 1950s, all the way to around the year 2000, a pretty steady growth in electrical demand on the grid, and that makes sense. We became wealthier as a nation. We more moved to the information economy. But really from 2000 to about 2020, 2025 even, demand on the grid has been relatively flat. And a lot of that has been that this movement towards more economic activity has been tempered by energy efficient appliances. Electronics take a lot less energy than, say, industrial equipment. So as we move away from manufacturing towards the information economy, you're using a lot less electricity. So we've gotten 2 decades, basically, almost 2.5 decades, of a utility grid and a regulatory industry that is fairly comfortable with level demand, essentially levelized demand. I guess the thesis I'll put forward on this is that that's all about to change, and it's about to change pretty dramatically. In fact, I found it interesting, this projection here, just to show you how wildly different organizations and different people and perspectives projecting this growth over the next couple of decades. And they just are all over the place. If you go with EIA, the bottom line there, that's the government's projection. And I've always found, looking at researching for textbooks and all that, EIA is always wrong. They're always wrong. I don't even know why they bother projecting, because they always overstate fossil fuels and they always understate renewable energy, 100%. And it must just be their internal biases or whatever. Then you get into the next group. I don't remember, it's blocked on mine, but the blue line there. And then we get into Wood Mackenzie, which is the upper one. Wood Mackenzie's probably a little more accurate. NEMA, the National Electrical Manufacturing Association. So these things are going to be all over the place. I'm going to throw in my own bias. I think they're all understated. And I'll show you why, I think. And some of the reasons we've already highlighted here. Vehicle electrification. We're on track to transfer a significant portion of our transportation industry away from gasoline, away from diesel fuel, and into the world of electricity. Transportation consumes about a third of all of our energy. And that's been primarily liquid fossil fuels. The buildings, the shells, that has been traditionally electrical, and industry has traditionally been natural gas. So you could sort of look at those as a third, where the electricity dealt with the buildings, dealt with our appliances, dealt with all of that. Liquid fossil fuels, petroleum products, they dealt with transportation, and natural gas dealt with heavy industry. All of these things are converging towards electricity. Data centers, again, that's the new industry, and it's electrified. It's not natural gas. And as mentioned by Meg, the artificial intelligence AI takes about 10 times as much electricity as traditional data services. So as that becomes more and more prevalent, obviously it takes more electricity. And then there is this transition towards electrical heat, away from natural gas towards electrical heating. We've always had air conditioning, which has been electrical for the most part. Now we're getting to heat with heat pumps and mini splits and things of this nature that in some jurisdictions, new homes are not even allowed to install natural gas. So they are moving towards the electrification. Now, when I was looking at the projections at the moment, the general consensus is we're looking at about a 3% annual rise in demand for electricity. So that is the general consensus. Doesn't seem overly dramatic there to me.
Jay, one of the factors that Meg brought up regarding the data centers, I think that the number is 9 out of 10 new data centers that have been constructed in the past 7 or 8 years are in the United States, not in other parts of the world, whereas the rest of the world wants to catch up with us and they want to become those data centers. The Saudis specifically, we just saw this deal go down, right? Or at least the conversation about it, to bring technology to the Middle Eastern countries so that they can use their fossil fuels to leverage the creation of data centers. And they will. So your point earlier that the fuel crisis in the 70s was a worldwide crisis, not just the United States. It was a supply issue worldwide. In the meantime, Europe, the EU, right now is seriously weaning themselves off of Russian natural gas and crude. So Russia's market is going to go to China and India if the world allows it, and I think they will. But these sorts of things will create that imbalance that you're referring to. It's going to become a perfect storm in not too distant future.
Yeah. Yeah, and I the whole world is too complex for me. So at this moment, at least what I'm focusing on in this presentation has been the US, because I see that there are all of these situations. There's this truck that's heading towards us, and are we, from a national perspective, prepared for it, and are our policies in harmony with what the reality of this situation is? And I don't think that's the case. Just as part of the news that we're talking about here earlier in this session, 98% of all of the new power added this quarter is wind and solar. That is not an anomaly. I mean, we're looking at least 95% over the next several years being wind and solar. So if we do have increased supply to meet this demand, it's going to come from wind and solar. You can even see on this diagram here some of the projections that are out there as far as generating capacity. The interesting takeaway I see from that is the yellow and the blue, of course, are wind and solar, growing significantly. Pretty much every other form of electrical generation is declining. So it's important that we look at that and factor that in, because that's another factor that we have to worry about. Not only are we going to be providing enough electrical generation from new sources to meet our demand, but what's happening with the fact that a significant portion of the electrical generating sources in the U.S. are already scheduled to be decommissioned. So that's something else to lay on top of that. Currently, the U.S. generating capacity is roughly 1,335 gigawatts of capacity. You can see that almost half of it is natural gas, some coal. Then we see wind, solar, nuclear. Wind, solar, nuclear, about 100 Wind and solar are in ascendancy, nuclear not. There will be some retirement of nuclear, but certainly no new nuclear being built, and I'll show you in a minute why. Coal heading down. So if we are seeing a 3% increase in electrical demand, then we will need to see 125 gigawatts of more capacity built over those 3 years. All right. And at the same time, we're looking at coal power plants being phased out. Plans are to phase out 61 gigawatts of coal. Well, when I plugged into the data from the US government here, between now and 2028, what are the planned retirements of power plants? We're looking at 94.5 gigawatts of already scheduled retirements. Significant amount of that is coal, but there's also a lot of natural gas there being retired as well. This is all economics. Some of these plants are very old, they're past their sell-by date, and it also costs significantly more to run an existing coal power plant than it does to build a new solar or wind facility. So when you add those two together, that we need, let's see, I've already forgotten my numbers here. We need 125 gigawatts more just to meet the demand. We're losing 95. So now what does that get us to? 210, 220, somewhere in there, 220 gigawatts. All right. Oh, 210. So we need 210 gigawatts of new generation if we retire the ones that are scheduled to be retired over the next 3 years. Well, then you get into the new policies that are being purported or being promoted within Washington. The Inflation Reduction Act was specifically designed to try and motivate this nation to build enough capacity to meet this issue, to meet the fact that we're about to have significant increase in demand. And now they're making plans to eliminate it, to gut it. So what does that mean? Well, I found this interesting diagram that said, okay, based on before and after the Inflation Reduction Act. So let's say we go back to our baseline, we gut the Inflation Reduction Act. What that's saying is that the projected increase in capacity would be about 60 gigawatts of new wind and solar. And remember, about 95 to 98% of all of the new power is going to be wind and solar. We need 210. Under this scenario, we're getting 60. That's not good. So a lot of folks will look at the queue and they'll say, well, look at all of these power plants that are in the queue, the interconnection queue. Well, it turns out a lot of those are phantom projects. They're there just to hold a place in the queue. Some scenarios have said that as many as 90% that are in the queue never get built. This chart is basically showing that only about a quarter of them that are in the queue ever get built, or actually a fifth, because 4 parts are withdrawn, 1 part is built. Currently, there's 177.5 gigawatts in the queue. So I guess my argument there would be to say, and this is the interconnection queue. This is basically, if you're a large scale utility system, you've got to have filed all the paperwork, gotten into the queue to get the approval to connect this to the grid. Remember, we already need 210 gigawatts just to stay even based on the 3%. 177 in the queue, and 90% of them are never built. So anything that's not in the queue today, I don't think has a snowball's chance of getting built before the end, within 3 years. It's just not going to be. I mean, the average length of time it takes to go through that process is like 4.5 years for utility scale systems in the queue. So I guess adding that on top, when you say, given a 3% demand increase, given a 95 gigawatt reduction, and given the fact that the regulatory process is lengthy and basically doesn't work, where 90% of them are withdrawn. I'm seeing a significant shortfall there that I don't see can be avoided. Okay, any disagreement on that or agreement?
I think that there is I think that there is a restriction on the queue based on the amount of transmission available. I know that in the Midwest now the grain belt express is being built up to Indiana. And I think that's going to diversify our sources of power and be able to bring, say, wind power from West Texas and in that area, Kansas and Colorado to the Northeast. So I think transmission is one of those things that we need to factor in as well. And I think it'll open up some opportunities in the queue that are not there available at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly. Jay?
Yeah, Dennis.
Hey, I think right now our biggest drawback is storage. We waste so much power we're generating throughout the day that our biggest problem is we don't have storage capacity for any of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We could put up enough solar panels, but where's all that energy going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you say, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So if we can hold that energy and use it, then yeah, you don't need more solar arrays. Essentially, you're harvesting. Well, you do need them, but you're harvesting and making it more reliable for sure. And all of these things, I think transmission, certainly constraint. There was a lot of money for transmission in the infrastructure bill. Whether that's going to be built in time, because these are lengthy time processes and a lot of right-of-way issues that come into effect, not in my backyard kind of issues where the people don't want these things running through their neighborhoods or whatever. So there's a lot of delays that are possible. And remember, I'm focused on the next 3 years. This is like, you're not going to build new transmission lines in the next 3 years. You may build a couple, but not enough to worry about. Batteries, I think, yeah, but they're also talking about reducing the incentives for those. So if you're going to reduce the incentives, if you're throwing 100% tariff on Chinese manufacturers of battery systems, and China is the leader in supplying these battery systems, and it takes you 3 to 5 years to build a U.S. manufacturing plant, how are you transitioning to a domestic supply in the next 3 years?
Correct. We need more research and developing our own stuff. Our own batteries, our own storage systems.
Sure. Yep. So when we're talking about how much new capacity can be added to the grid, I just took the number that in 2024, we added 48.7 gigawatts of new capacity, almost all of it wind, solar, and batteries. Okay, great. That's good. Let's assume we continue at that pace. Over the next 3 years, that's going to add 150 gigawatts. Now, there would be some discussion saying, given these tariffs, given the supply line disruption, given the reduction in these incentives, is it realistic to think we're going to maintain that pace? I don't know. But let's just assume we do. That still ends up with a 6% shortfall between what we need and what we're going to have in 3 years, which is effectively the same as the Arab oil embargo of the 1970s. Given that we assume a 3% increase in demand and that we're going to be installing new capacity at the same rate that we're installing it currently. Unless something changes to dramatically incentivize wind and solar, that is something looming out there. But let me just throw in a couple of other factors. Natural gas is not going to be the answer For sure, for sure. First off, it's too expensive comparatively. But looking it up right now, if I wanted to build a natural gas power plant, there is a 7 to 9 year wait to get a gas turbine. You talk about major league supply chain disruptions. You just can't do it. You can't get them unless you've already got that thing ordered. You've already got it in hand. You're going to wait 7 to 9 years for that utility scale gas turbine. So natural gas, not the answer. What about nuclear? Well, the mean for constructing a nuclear power plant over the life of nuclear has been 7.5 years. There are none in the pipeline at the moment. So we're looking at least 7.5 years. The latest one took 43 years to get constructed. I mean, this is not going to happen over the next 3 years. Nuclear is not the answer. Once again, it comes back to wind and solar. Those are the only supplies, the only generating facilities that could, in theory, be built during those time constraints of the next 3 years. So how solid is that 3%? Remember, we're going on a very conservative estimate of a 3% growth in demand over the next 3 years, 5 years, whatever. Well, according to the projections I've found, EVs currently account for 1.4% of the vehicles in the US. Projections are 10 to 30% of the cars on the road will be electric by 2028. So let's throw a number in there of 20%. That basically means 35 billion gallons of gasoline will become electrified. Essentially, we're going to move from liquid petroleum to electricity. And the estimates are that adds 14% to our annual electric capacity or consumption. So just electric vehicles alone, if that 20% number is accurate, are going to add 14%. And we're already talking about 9 and some change as our total electrical growth. So I would say right there, if we look, then this is just showing you the market here that 20% is not unrealistic. Okay, so then let's throw in data centers. Data centers currently consume 4.4% of the electricity consumed within the US. By 2028, it's assumed it will be 6.7 to 12%. If it does hit that higher number, that means we need to add an additional 7.6% added generating capacity just to meet the needs of data centers within the United States. Then let's add transition to electric heating. Well, the estimates are by going to heat pumps, going away from gas furnaces, going towards mini splits, that's going to add between 5 to 10% by 2028. This is of total electrical consumption. And then let's throw in our everybody's favorite, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. Currently, it consumes about 2%. For every Bitcoin, it takes about $40,000 worth of electricity to make a Bitcoin. Just assume it goes up 1% over the next 3 years. So that's going to be another 1%. Estimates on global warming. This is another one people don't really throw in. But if the increase in global warming continues at the rate it has, they're estimating we'll see 9% additional electrical demand for cooling of food, for cooling of people, for cooling of equipment. A 9% increase in our electrical need because the world is getting warmer. That right there. And in industry, if you look at, we're trying to reshore a lot of industry, the estimates are to see a 2 to 3% increase in industry. We're saying we want to build more inverters, we want to build more solar panels, we want to build more steel, we want to build all of these things domestically. That's going to increase our consumption by 2 to 3%. So we throw all of these guys together, EVs, data, heating, crypto, industry, climate changes, and we're saying not 9.3% increase in demand in 3 years, but 42% increase in demand in 3 years. Yeah. Okay. I don't think that's going to happen, but anything close, it just feels like this is a potential tsunami that is occurring at the same time we're talking about reeling back our best chance at energy generation, which is wind and solar. Okay, we got a couple of minutes here. What do you think? Is this full of nonsense?
Well, I'm sitting behind, wind turbines on my mountain right now, and to the left of me, I have coal mines. Well, I think you're correct. I think it has, the solar has to increase and the wind. If not, coal is always been there, unfortunately. So I hate to say that.
Yep. Well, the issue with coal, of course, is obviously there's still coal in the ground, but if you've shut down the mine, you're not going to get to it. And it's not economically viable compared to the alternatives. So I keep coming back to coal is not the answer, natural gas is not the answer, nuclear is not the answer. The answer is wind and solar. Economically, the industry has already accepted that by installing 98% of new energy is coming from wind and solar. Now the question is, if that is our solution, and I think there are other solutions. There's energy efficiencies, there's load management issues, there's the advent of batteries. There are a lot of different things we can do in there on top of that, for sure. But we should be doubling down on generating capacity and wind and solar being the primary economic options, not pulling back on it. So.
Are there really no industrialists in the Republican hierarchy that can talk sense to their colleagues?
I'm sure there are, but yeah, nobody's demonstrating a whole lot of courage on this.
Jay, I think part of the problem with getting more capacity is the fact that, that I went to your class because I wanted solar. And the prices I was getting for installation of solar were just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. And I took the course and I realized that some of these contractors are charging 200% above. And then I talked to a lot of people I know and they would love to put solar in. But when you tell the average person on an average, 980 watt system, that's going to cost them $30,000 for a system, they're going, I can't do that. I can't. Right. I just can't do it. And they would love to do it, but like I said, that one contractor, I quoted all the prices, everything was going to be $8,000. He wanted $30,000. Yeah. And I've talked to some other people I know, and they've seen the same thing. So we're limiting it ourselves because we're overpricing all these systems, and we could put a lot more systems out there if we stop putting a 200% markup on things.
No, I agree. I agree that that's an issue. And somebody in the comments mentioned, I haven't been talking about rooftop solar for homes and commercial businesses. And yeah, that is going to be an option. But just as you mentioned, Chris, that there have been extreme markups, so we need more affordable. The government, the Republicans in Congress are talking about eliminating the 30% tax credit for residential. So right there, you're going to add 30% to the cost that's already high. So by the time consumers realize that their electricity has quadrupled in price and now solar is economical for them, the problem is already upon us. Eventually, they'll transition to.
And again, but the problem is most of the people can't afford $30,000 for a system. They just can't. They're not going to be able to. There's no, even with the cash back and all that, you're still talking $20 some odd $1,000. And you talk to the average person, that's not doable.
Right. Unless it's built into the financing of their property. If it's the difference between getting a loan and say, okay, I'll spend $100 a month for electricity on my loan or $150 if I pay to the electric company, then it's affordable. It really doesn't matter what the out-of-pocket cost was if it's being financed and paid for in that way. But You're right. We traditionally the solar industry has worked on low volume, high margin, where an installer will install very few systems but charge a significant profit on each of those systems. We obviously need to transition to a model where you're talking about higher volume, lower margin. And so far nobody's been able to crack that nut. And maybe the solution lies in some product that evolves that's a do-it-yourselfer kind of thing. We've seen some of those where you just simply plug it into an outlet, but then you get regulatory issues and you get rapid shutdown and anti-islanding issues and all of that. But those could be overcome certainly in an emergency
Then you talk
situation.
about the financing too. Some of the banks won't finance it because they don't think it's a good investment. And
And
then some of the real estate people are telling me that they decrease the price of the property if there's solar on it,
yeah.
not increase it.
Well, and we have to obviously will be an education on that. But yeah, you're right. And a significant portion of the population are simply not credit worthy. They, if you say 50% of the people don't qualify for any kind of loan, why would they then qualify for a loan on solar? So that's not a solution in and of itself. I don't have solutions. I'm just saying I'm just saying this is a problem, and it feels like it's heading towards us. And it also feels like the guys in Washington or the guys in the state house of any state don't have solutions either. And they're not even aware of the problem. So
Jay,
that's, yeah.
I think that there is, taking it back to where you started in 1970. In 1970, I remember Amory Lovins was talking about how it was projected that we would need 1,400 nuclear power plants, and they were trying to figure out how we were going to finance 1,400 power nuclear stations around the country. And at the rate that energy use was growing at that time, and also because of OPEC, it never happened.
Right.
We leveled off primarily, and again, this is because of efficiency, and also there was not as much price elasticity as we expected. That people would say, "No, I don't think we're going to pay that much," either because we're going to cut back, or because they were when electricity bills got to the point where one of the people in the chat said, my electricity starts at 30 cents or 40 cents a kilowatt hour, and then it goes up from there. At that point, people will find efficiency. They'll find ways of doing, using their hibachi out on the grill, out on the patio during the hot periods. I think we will find ways of getting around it because obviously, if the power is not there, we won't use it. Mm-hmm. So, there's a point at which, yes, our lifestyles will be curtailed, but I think that there are ways we can do it. People do it all over the world. We're at one end of the continuum, and almost everybody else in the world is on the other end of the continuum in terms of power use.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. I agree that the long-term prospects of all of this are extremely positive. That we will see an energy transition where we find ourselves with virtual power plants, with battery backup from our electric vehicles, with virtual utilities, with energy efficiency integrated into your homes, with distributed energy integrated in homes and businesses. I think a lot of the solutions for these data centers are going to be behind the meter microgrids. Because they can afford to do that and they get past all of the regulatory. I think that if you project out 10 years, we're in this whole new world that is better than the world we're in here at the moment. I just think in the shorter term, we're heading into a disruptive event that's going to then spawn a lot of that innovation and a lot of those changes. But there will be short-term pain during that transition.
I completely agree.
Yeah. So any other comments? We're running right up against it here. We got about 2 more minutes. I'll let someone throw it in.
The only thing I was going to add is there is some things on the savings side that maybe need to be tallied. not getting good numbers, but there's a lot of energy spent in refinement for gasoline and distribution that would be saved, presumably. I'm looking at several hundred gigawatts per year. I don't know how accurate that is, though. Unvalidated.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, perhaps when you do get away from, I mean, some of those industries, like you said, like the refining industry. On the other hand, though, the elimination of things like the Energy Star program, to me, that's just, how can you say it other than it's just dumb?
Stupid. Yeah.
That's just kind of all you're dealing with dumb, a dumb agenda in
Right.
the as this truck is it's almost like this truck is heading towards us, so let's all lie down. It's like,
I think it's a temporary insanity.
yeah, I agree. I think so.
Yeah, it's going to be very effective though in disruption.
Yeah.
Jay, one more thing too is that just in the building of new houses and remodeling, is that passive solar is not even entertained as far as heating your house.
Yeah, that's true.
And if and architects still are completely ignoring it.
Yeah, most architects. There are some architects out there who do integrate it, but you're right. I mean, passive solar, when we talk about heating, transitioning to electrical heat, why not transition to passive heat first?
Yeah, if y'all get on the ACES chat, there's a guy named Keith Sharp that's um, got passive conditioning for buildings. He's got a program that'll, if you do it right, it'll be for buildings that would have zero. They would condition themselves for zero power consumption. So it would take conditioning of buildings off the grid, but there's still a lot of other power consumption,
Yeah.
appliances and whatnot.
Yep. Okay, well, I'm going to have to shut it off here, but I appreciate you guys for this interesting discussion, and we'll get back together. As I mentioned, during the summer, we're going to go to once a month, so I'll send out my notices as opposed to every week on this, but I'll still do the solar news each week, and I'll be posting that. So thank you for all of your attention, and we'll see you the next time we get together.